Awesome. All right, well, thank you all for coming today. Today's panel is measuring the success of live content delivery. As we talked about yesterday in the fountain room, we're working our way through the aspects of live delivery, and this is one of those things where we look at measuring the success as something happens as well as after it's happened. I've got 4 panelists, and starting with Chris, I'd like each one of you to introduce yourself and just say a little bit about your company.
So I'm Chris Mangum. I'm based out of Dallas, work for Yahoo, and as the slide says, I'm a video architect, and my specialty is live video for Yahoo.
My name is Dylan Armajani. I'm a video consultant for Conviva. And Conviva, we like to think of ourselves as a real-time video control platform. So you can really think of it as we have a little heartbeat that's in all of the players, and we let you see in real time across all of your devices everything from kind of top-level analytics, what's my PCV, how many people are watching, all the way down to kind of the engagement level, how much are they consuming, what's the content affinity between one kind of content and another, and then down to the actual kind of quality-specific KPIs, such as how is bitrate volatility impacting those higher levels, how is video startup time, et cetera. So we kind of aim to give you a full vision into what your audience's experience is.
I'm Justin Liu. I'm a lead engagement manager for Akamai. I basically manage the team of technical consultants for the media and gaming customers on the West Coast. For those who aren't familiar with Akamai, we're one of the leading CDNs. We basically help deliver the content in the middle for all these live events. We're usually part of all the major events. And outside of just the pure bit delivery, we're right in the middle of the workflow. We do things such as the content prep, storage, security of the content, security of the site and infrastructure. I have teams that help support the live events, as well as what we're talking about today, analytics. We do server-side analytics as well as whatever we can get from the client side, and obviously both are key pieces when you're running a live stream.
And Akamai was singled out today in the keynote as being one of the CDNs that helped deliver the NFL game from London.
No comment, but
yes.
Acknowledge.
Yahoo said it. So.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Lakoff. I am a general manager within Comcast Wholesale. I imagine most folks in the audience are familiar with Comcast, but may not be familiar with our business unit, Comcast Wholesale. Basically, just very quickly, what Comcast Wholesale does is we look within Comcast, right, and we identify platforms, infrastructure, various innovations that we utilize for our own business and our own core services. And we open those up and extend those as offerings to third parties. And so we've got a range of businesses within Comcast Wholesale. I and my team run a suite of services aligned around video, right? And so the services that we offer really span the whole life cycle of content, right? So we can acquire content, we can originate content in terms of building channels, and then we've got a whole suite of capabilities supporting the management and delivery of content, live or VOD, over the top, right? So we've got a live streaming service, we have a CDN that we own and operate, and then also the platform, their MPX platform is part of our capabilities as well, right? So a content management, workflow orchestration, and player. Yeah.
Okay, good. So we're going to start with you and come back down the panel. The first question I had is, what live streaming analytics or measurement challenges do you sense your customers have as sort of their highest pain points?
Sure. I mean, I think part of the challenge that we have, around analytics is really the same, just around building out a technology stack, is that frequently, what we find are content providers, broadcasters, programmers are leveraging capabilities across a number of partners, right? So they may have one or multiple CDNs, they may be utilizing some other service around transcoding, obviously there are multiple devices, multiple bit rates. And the challenge is everyone is capturing the data, but it's siloed, right? So there's no global dashboard that allows you, really a comprehensive or universal view into QoS and QoE, right? Because you're having to stitch it across multiple pieces of the stack.
And is that both during the live event and after the event, or after the event, do the analytics get stitched up and rolled up into a dashboard?
I think it varies, right? I mean, obviously, there's a time challenge during the live event, but, it's certainly not a trivial task, right, to port data and kind of build out a universal dashboard. So I'd say it's a challenge across the board.
Okay. Justin?
Sure. Yeah, I think I have a similar theme in terms of everyone's getting more intelligent with measuring analytics and having it built into the workflow. And so it's kind of like the big data problem, right? We have a lot of data now, but what do we really do with it? So say when you're during a live event, people are now, our customers are having this data now. We know that there's, say, rebuffering or there's a fire going on. Oftentimes as you're starting off, you're much more in a reactive state. And so being able to go into that proactive mode where you're seeing it build up, you know what to do. And like you're saying, there's often many different vendors, you have to share all the different data. So figuring out like a good run book of how you actually use this data to not only react to instances, but prevent it.
Okay. Dylan?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think the hardest part is how do you make that data actually actionable? Right now, you can see, okay, we have a huge drop off of PCV, but what caused it? And you might be looking at 50 other different metrics, everything from rebuffering to video start failures to exit before video starts across multiple CDNs. And so I think the biggest challenge is how do you customize that view just for you and make sure that each group has kind of only the things that they should be watching. Making sure that the, basically your marketing team is just looking at kind of those top level KPIs such as, what are the audience numbers, what's the PCVs, are our, tweets out there and social media outreaches working to bring people in. Then for your tech ops team and your NOC, they should be looking at what's the rebuffering per CDN, what's the video start failures, and then even segmenting the ones that you see impact specific parts of your back end, having that team just having those numbers, because when you look at everything, it's so much noise that it's hard to actually be actionable on that.
So a quick question on that. When you're talking about key performance indicators, whether it's for the NOC, the Network Operating Center, or the marketing team, is the idea to do sort of a Pareto chart where you do a high-level dashboard and then you can drill down to those 35 or 40, or is it to present 25 or so that people would see and the teams would see in real time?
So yeah, we like to segment it up for our customers so that each group has their own dashboard that just has those key performance indicators that are relevant to them.
Okay.
And I think also there can be danger in having data in the wrong set of hands.
Sure.
You hate to say that, but if certain groups can see that things are performing badly, it's actually just going to spin things maybe out of control because they can't actually do anything about that.
Don't panic.
Exactly.
Okay, very good. Chris?
So Dylan hit a couple of the points that I was going to mention. For us, like my customers are mainly internal stakeholders.
Right.
For Yahoo, but exits before video starts, which you mentioned, rebuffer ratio is probably the number one thing that we look at and make decisions based on.
Right. And of course, in the keynote today, there was a mention that you all did a pretty good job on that in the game.
Yeah, we're pretty pleased with it. So hopefully some people in the audience watched it and we're happy as well. Another key one for us though is time for the first frame to load.
Okay.
And back in the RTMP days, it was 8 to 12 seconds, and now that HLS is here, our engineering teams spent a ton of time getting that down to sub-second, either 1 second or sub-second. So that's something we're also very proud of and look at consistently.
Nice. Now, one of the things that was mentioned, and you may not be able to address this, but during the keynote, one of the things that was mentioned was the fact that staying with an 8-second HLS segment, because of the limitations of the CDNs to deal with the number of requests per second. And there wasn't really any detail that was discussed on that, and that may be something either Akamai or Yahoo could mention to expand on, or you may not be able to talk about it at all.
I'll try to talk about it a little
Okay.
bit. PPSN, who's in the audience, kind of spoke on it earlier. We really would like to get down to 2 seconds, but just the sheer size and mass of the NFL audience.
Right.
we basically made a decision not to flirt with danger. Most of the CDNs that we partner with are 8 seconds. They recommend 8 seconds,
Okay.
and we stuck with that. We tinkered with it early on, like we had roughly a 4.5 month lead time, and we tinkered with lower segment times, and kind of saw some ingestion problems.
Right.
Just without that massive load on it.
Okay.
So 8 seconds is what we stuck
Got it.
with.
Yeah, and just to speak to that a little bit more, I mean, that's more or less the standard recommendation.
Right.
And also speaking to the keynote, I mean, you see how many different players there were in the whole workflow.
Right.
And so even though you bring it down to 2 seconds, maybe you test one workflow, another workflow, but when you're in a bad situation and we don't really know how a player will react and be able to test that out and simulate all that through, sticking with the standard practices is, the safest bet if
Sure.
it's not that critical at this point.
Yeah, adding just a little bit to that, if let's suppose one of the CDNs could have handled 2 seconds and the rest of them could only handle 8, there's a possibility of a player refresh and the end user loses 6
And there's
seconds.
also a single point of failure at that point if you're looking at 2 versus 8.
Correct, yeah.
All right, so that sort of mentioning the multiple devices kind of leads into the next question, which is in terms of content types that are measured, I mean, typically we talk about bit streams and advertisements. Is there additional metadata that's measured about devices or other kinds of content metadata that we measure in a live event? And again, I'll start on the far end and we'll come back.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd say, yeah, I mean, meta, if you want to call it metadata, right, that matters, right? Because what's important is the breakdown, right? So you're going to have different metrics around long form, short form. You're going to have different metrics across different devices, right? You're going to have different metrics across, different networks, right? And so being able to get down to that granular view matters, right? Otherwise, you're just dealing with a dirty average that really isn't instructive, right? And so, I mean, I'm sure you can talk about this, right? But that's the power of a lot of these analytical tools is where you can have these drill down capabilities, right? And slice it, where you can get some intelligent insights into what's happening during a stream and ex post after the event.
And would that lead also to recommendations as to what kind of devices to allow the content to be played back on live versus not?
Well, we're not we're not in the position to recommend that, right?
Okay.
So I mean, that is in the hands of the content owner, and that's ultimately going to be driven by, the consumer, right? If you're trying to drive audience size, if you're trying to drive user engagement, scale matters. A lot of Apple devices.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I may have my Western Digital player, but that's probably not a recommended player versus the Fire Stick.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Justin?
Yeah, I mean, similar there, and kind of touching upon the theme of how you operationalize it. Obviously, all the QoS, QoE metrics are always going to be helpful. On top of that is, what do you do with the data, right? So what your team is able to do. So having the devices obviously is going to give you a lot of granularity when you have a lot of different devices.
Mm-hmm.
But having that as a peer view may not necessarily give you much to act upon. So things like having the location down to the network, having all the different metrics that your team can actually act on, that's what you need to really focus on. It varies from customer to customer, but that's kind of like the focus that I would say.
Dylan?
Yeah, I would echo, kind of the importance of being able to drill down, all the way to a, what version phone is this with what version of operating system. But I think what's really important is also looking at it and being able to take all those groups and then kind of put your quality KPIs on top of that and actually see, okay, are these devices underperforming in certain areas? Can we do something to fix that? And if not, should we support it or should we not support it? And I think you also need to be kind of looking back at how do your viewers go across all of these devices? Because what you'll find is their experience and what they expect on an iPhone is very different than an Xbox 4, an Xbox One or a PS4. I was like, I just invented a new thing. But what we'll often find is actually looking at those viewers' viewing habits is really important because you may find that giving them the bad experience on the iPhone actually causes them not to come back on their gaming device. So we kind of really say that you need to have everything down to those specifics, but you also need to have the viewer specific. You need to be able to identify one viewer as they navigate all of those devices.
And would it come down to, I mean, obviously we look at operating systems, iOS 9, iOS 8. On devices, would it come down to firmware versions and that kind of thing? I mean, do we measure to that level?
So we do, and we actually have a lot of our customers that will even come to us and say, we're going to launch in Mexico. Can you tell us what the popular devices are, the popular firmware, the popular operating systems? Because we don't know what to build for, and we don't know what to test. So I think that's very important to capture that granular.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, especially since when you look at manufacturers, the firmware that it's installed on when it's built, it's not guaranteed it's going to phase out.
Right.
So that's something
And also to the regional model, what may be firmware in Asia Pacific may not be the same firmware that's available in the US or North America. Chris?
So Yahoo is a data-driven company. We measure everything. So the more we can get, the better. Prior to the NFL, we really only supported Xbox, Apple TV, Roku on OTT devices as well as connected TVs. Mentioned earlier in the keynote this morning, we supported 14 different devices, OTT devices.
And my Western Digital player was not one of them.
No, not that one. That one didn't make the cut. But yeah, we gleaned a lot of key information on those devices, and I believe Dylan mentioned, which ones got the most streams, which ones didn't, which ones performed better. We gained a lot of valuable IP just out of that one exercise.
So let me ask a question on that, kind of from an industry-wide standpoint. You gain valuable information. Conviva has valuable information. Akamai has valuable information. When we look at other parts of the industry, we have open standards committees and those kinds of things around authentication. Is there something similar within the analytics world, especially when it comes to devices and like that, where that information gets shared between, obviously you guys, you make a living sharing that information, but between the CDN, between a company like Yahoo, between the network providers like what you're doing, how does that information get shared from a learning standpoint for the industry? Or is it a competitive,
Advantage.
Advantage, yeah.
Yeah, it's we've shared what we could. The rest of it is IP that we're going to keep compartmentalized. So it's you mentioned it's a competitive advantage.
Okay.
We don't want to give away the secret sauce.
And would that be true across the panel?
Yeah, I think that there's probably room for improvement, but there is kind of a competitive advantage there. And I know, for example, you and me have the same metrics in our platform, but they mean different things based on what the platform is. What we consider video startup time is probably not what you consider video startup time versus what Chris considers video startup time.
Okay, so part of it is the
Those
commonality of
definitions
the
are very
definition.
fragmented.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Anything else for you all?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, being a network operator, right, we look at it a little bit differently, right?
Sure.
Because this informs how we build out the network, how we plan, how we do capacity management, right? So, we're very eager to, collect and get access to information around 4K adoption rates, various bit rates, various devices, and understand what that adoption curve looks like, because we're building that out literally into a 10-year plan around infrastructure. That may be something that's somewhat unique to us as a network operator.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to open it up for Q&A briefly and then come back to some questions. But speaking of competitive advantage, is there anything novel that any of you feel like you're measuring that nobody else in the industry is measuring that provides you a competitive advantage?
You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I'd say one thing that's potentially unique about our capabilities is again, within Comcast Wholesale, we provide infrastructure, right? So we have streaming infrastructure, we have network, we have CDN. And so from that, we are collecting and sharing with our customers QoS information, right? Uptime, availability, throughput errors, error status codes, right? Basic QoS data. But as part of our business, we also have the platform, right, which is a content management system and is basically engineering and managing customer experiences, and we have a player SDK. And so through that, we're getting core QoE data. And so, we're able to provide a comprehensive view across QoS and QoE through those capability sets. And I think one thing that we didn't really touch on is, kind of getting to your first question, right? What's lacking, and what are some of the challenges? I think a lot of it is around predictive analysis, right? So everything that we've talked about to date around measurements have been, okay, you've run a live event, it's over, let's go back, see what happened, learned, and make the next one better, right? Well, I'm sure when Yahoo, had their big NFL event, the key thing is making sure that event is flawless, right? And so having some type of predictive capability, right, where you're getting QoS information. And so, maybe something is starting to bubble up and it's not a problem and it's not impacting QoE, but if you don't address it, if you don't switch CDN providers, if you don't reorient your origin, it's going to be a problem. I'd say that's another big piece that I think we're also, most infrastructure providers are able to help with in terms of providing that QoS data and using it in a predictive fashion.
All right. So, outside of the standard QoE metrics, I was pleasantly surprised this morning when I found out Akamai actually run the runner-up rewards for analytics. But outside of that, it's looking into how we actually have our distributed platform. We have over 170,000 servers around the world, or in thousands of networks. And so even though it may not be a direct customer visibility, is that we see about 15 to 30% of the internet's traffic every day. And so with that, if during your live event, you may not be the only provider of that content. So when we see certain issues or rebuffering in a certain network, it helps us be able to diagnose, like, well, is that really this customer, this network, and there's a specific issue? Or is it really this network that's choking up and it's across all the customers we have in that area? So that's one thing I think is really different with Akamai, just the way that we're distributed.
Sure, just the scope that you have.
Yeah, I would say I think our one big competitive advantage is, we don't care what CDN you use. We don't care what devices you use. We support all of them. And so we'll let you see your complete audience across any device, any network, any CDN, et cetera. And then I think what makes us a little unique on top of that is that we actually are doing some of the predictive analysis. And so we have a lot of customers where we actually feed kind of their CMS on a player-by-player decision as far as which CDN which path they should give that viewer. And we'll actually make that based on our whole global data set. So if we see, for example, one of Chris's customers at Yahoo having a really bad experience watching a specific kind of content, on a specific ISP in a specific city, we'll say, okay, well, this guy who's with a new customer, he's going to have the same network problems, so let's give him a different path to that content. So I think that's kind of starting to get to that predictive, kind of what is this user's experience going to be before they even hit the play button.
So that's actually moving one step beyond global load balancing, as you said, to sort of the predictive piece. Okay, interesting. Chris?
Exactly.
So, I don't know that this classifies as novel because everybody pretty much measures the same thing in live video, rebuffer ratio as where video starts, et cetera. But I mentioned player load time earlier. The faster the player loads, that directly correlates with exits before video starts. The faster your player loads, the more sticky your video is going to be, right? And the customers will stay with it. And then just the other thing, it's really probably not related to analytic measurement, but just the sheer scale of Yahoo. Not everybody can deliver 33 million streams to an audience within 4 hours. So
although we would have loved to have heard peak concurrent views at some point.
Yeah, I would like to keep my job, so we'll just keep that secret.
Yeah, as you said, we have audience members who might not allow you to continue.
It's live right there.
Right, exactly. All right, so we're going to open it up real quick for for one or two questions from the audience. Okay, in the back here.
So when you say the latent first frame time, the under 1 second or 1 second, how is it measured? Is it an average, median, or some other?
And I'm going to repeat the question real quick so we get it on the stream. So the question is, when we talk about player start times in a second or less, How is that measured?
So over the course of it's measured in real time over the course of the event, and we may or may not partner with somebody on this panel that does that for us. It helps us out very much with that.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment to that?
Yeah, I guess I'll just follow up and say I think it is important, when you are looking at your metrics, to look at the averages and the medians and kind of where, from basically 0% to 100%, your audience falls into, because it is possible for you to have, a small number of users that have a horrible experience, and you may think that you have a problem when you don't have a problem.
Right.
So I think that just kind of as general guidance, it's something you should look at. Look at medians, look at averages, look at percentiles.
Right. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, he mentioned it. You might have a spike above 1 second, but sometimes you just have to wait it out. That CDN may be having a problem. There's multiple things that could go into that. But like I said, sometimes you just have to ride out the storm for a few minutes. Now, if it continues to rise, you've obviously got to take action.
But even if it doesn't rise above that, you'll have particular sub-scenarios that you want to be able to drill down into and fix those problems for the next time around as well. So, all right, another question from the audience.
What do you think the synchronization challenge is?
The synchronization challenge?
Yeah, so everybody
Are you talking about HLS delay or?
or whatever you use any protocol that can give you different delays.
So I think this kind of goes to the comment that was made during the keynote today, which is you go into a bar and you watch you watch 8 TVs, they're all synchronized. If you tried to watch 8 HLS devices, nowhere close.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody who's worked with HLS, I mean, that's how the technology was built. That's how Apple built it. Now, we want to get down as low as possible, and we're pursuing 2 seconds.
So would the 2 seconds actually help with the synchronization? Or only
Well,
make it off by a second and a half?
It's going to be closer to real time. I'll
Okay.
answer it that way,
All
right?
right.
Like back in the RTMP days, once it loaded, it was pretty much real time. It was maybe 1 second off.
Right.
HLS is just not designed that way, and the CDNs that we partner with don't recommend it, but we're going to encourage them to recommend it.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to that, I mean, it's having the standards, right? I mean, it goes back to the fundamentals of the internet wasn't really designed with all of this in mind.
Right.
I mean, we're sending data, we're sending as fast as we can, but having it planned and designed already to have it all synced up, that's not really how it's designed for. And now we're kind
TCP
of coming
inherently,
from,
right.
So now we're coming from behind and trying to do the best we can really do with the technology we have.
Yeah, a lot of people point the finger at the internet or HLS for the delay, but most people don't realize that DirecTV, it's delayed. If you're not on a true cable provider and you're getting satellite, it's delayed 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. Or if you've got if you got an OTA, an antenna,
Right.
it's significantly more delayed. So it's not just the internet that's delayed, but it gets all the attention.
Right, and of course, we've got the broadcast dump, the 2-second broadcast delay, et cetera. So it's never in real time. All right. Is it a follow-up question?
Yeah, for the 8-second chunk size, how many chunks do you use for HLS?
So the question is, how many 8-second? Yeah, how many?
In live stream.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. You got
Right, that is the answer.
Thank you.
3.
Yeah, 3.
That's sort of the inherent best practice to the
It's the
industry.
recommendation, yes.
Right, exactly. All right, so a couple more questions here, and then we'll go back to audience questions. Are there any content types or genres that have slipped off the sort of must-be-measured list in the past 2 or 3 years? And I mean, you mentioned RTMP. Of course, we've got a number of protocols out there that aren't used as widely these days. So I'll open that up to anybody on the panel.
As far as content types that are not measured, and that doesn't really apply to us. Like I said, we measure everything.
Okay.
If you don't measure it, you don't know how you performed, and you can't make future decisions based on data.
Yeah, I would just say if you're going to spend the money to put it on your site and to produce that content, why would you not measure it? And why would you not want to know what the impact that content has on your audience is? So, I mean, I would say measure everything.
Yeah, well, in general, I do agree. We're measuring it, might as well measure it, as long as you can handle all the data. Just to play devil's advocate and just toss something out there. I think one measurement that it's not as critical anymore is, say, drop frames. I mean,
Okay.
with adaptive bit rate, it's important, but it's not as important anymore. As long as, say, the audio's still running smooth, the video's still playing. You may have a drop frame here and there. You hope it's not when there's a touchdown pass.
As long as there's not a bunch of them,
Yeah.
a bunch of drop frames.
In a row, exactly.
Yeah, no, and I'd concur, right? I mean, if it's worth doing, it's worth measuring. I think as expectations around quality for over-the-top continue to grow, right? I mean, nothing's falling off, right? There's just more and more focus on measuring and improving the performance and creating a real broadcast quality experience.
Okay. And then another question, what, given the fact that we have a lot of experience here on the panel, what kind of fundamental analytics or measurements should our audience members here use to make their live events more successful? I mean, we talked about the fact that there are sort of the industry standards that we measure, but in practical terms, for somebody who's doing a live event, what should they focus on?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we think about it in three buckets, right? So one bucket is engagement. And so the frequent requests that we get, are around audience size, conversion, right? Whatever that means, whether it's a click-through, whether it's some kind of electronic sell-through, what are the conversion rates? And then, I'd say the next bucket is QoE, right? And I think we've talked about all the core metrics there. I mean, the key is buffering, right? I mean, I'd say that's at the top. And then, depending on content type, right, whether it's short form or long form, you could make an argument that bit rate or startup time you could debate which one of those is second. And then the third are QoS metrics, right? So uptime, availability, what type of errors are you receiving from various components within the infrastructure. I'd say those are the core buckets that we get requests from our customers.
Okay.
Yeah, so going back to being able to drill down, troubleshooting, for us, some of the best practices is having the location as granular as you can. Either be it by country, state, city, or even more narrow than that. That's ideal, which networks they're connecting to, so that you're getting an idea of, when you're trying to troubleshoot, what you're actually dealing with. Similarly with the devices, OS, and whatnot. On top of that, I think something else that's also important, especially if you mentioned somebody that's starting off and trying to figure out what's good to have in there, understanding how long somebody actually stays in a single bit rate. Mm-hmm. Because you might start off with a really wide gamut of different bit rates. And you're doing that because you're trying to adapt and provide as seamless as possible experience. But at the same time, you're doing more renditions, you're creating more work into the workflow. And as if you find that certain bit rates aren't as necessary, it's good to know that there's some that are just stopgaps that barely get used, and they may not be worth the op cost.
Okay. And what about from a CDN standpoint, what about measurements as to how many CDNs a customer needs to use during the middle of a live event? Of course, Akamai would say just use Akamai, but in reality, we have models where it's multiple CDNs that are being at least deployed, if not used. Is there a measurement around that audience members should consider? And
just Akamai.
Right.
I can probably take that one.
Well, and it looks like we
just
actually
Akamai
have
and the Comcast CD. No, I mean, I would say
everybody wants to.
Yeah, at Comcast, right? I mean, we very much embrace a multi-CDN approach, right? And so, we would certainly point out that we have a bit of a unique value proposition, right? But I'd say the key is that you want to stitch together a fabric of CDNs where each CDN is somewhat different, right? Where they each have unique advantages, where you really can optimize performance and cost across multiple providers. I don't know that there's an optimal number, right?
Okay. So it's not about the
there's certainly diminishing returns at some point.
It's not just about the redundancy, then it's actually about shaping the traffic across the particular CDNs.
Sure. I mean, there are going to be CDNs that perform better based on traffic types, based on geographies, based on subscriber base, right? I mean, there are CDNs that have unique advantages.
Okay, Chris?
So, at Yahoo, we've been using multiple CDNs, at least 3 CDNs for years now. the NFL, we use 7. But my recommendation is, everybody has a budget, and you got to work within your budget. But if you can use 2 CDNs, you'll be covered. You need redundancy there, and I believe Steve touched on it. If you've got an analytics measurement tool where you can drill down to the ISP or the city that will tell you, what specific rebuffer ratios or where your problem is, you can isolate your problem and shift traffic to a different CDN who may be performing better in that particular region. That will help quite a bit.
Okay. Dylan, going back to the original question, what kind of measurements for the audience members?
Yeah, so I would say actually the first thing before you decide what those metrics are is actually to look at kind of the bottom 10% of your audience and the top 10%, and then start to look at what's different. Because what you'll find is, video startup time matters a lot for some customers. For other business models, it doesn't matter. If you have really compelling content and the users are going to be sitting there for 2 hours watching it, it doesn't really matter if it loads in 2 seconds or 4 seconds across every device. But you may find that something like the bit rate matters a lot more to them. But then again, if you're more of a news talking heads, the bit rate might matter less, and rebuffering is going to matter more because those interrupts, when they actually can't hear the voice, is going to be a lot more jarring. So what we really recommend is look at the bottom of your audience, look at the top of your audience, and find what's causing users to stay and what's causing users to leave, and then you can kind of choose which KPIs you should be looking at.
And I would add, in the research we've done at Unisphere, which is tied to streaming media, we found an amazingly high tolerance for people to wait up to 5 seconds and then hit refresh at least once and wait another 5 seconds for their content to start. So as you say, sometimes the compelling content is the content that people will wait around for a bit longer. So Chris, what would you recommend to audience members in terms of analytics?
Can you?
Sorry. So the question that we were working on was for audience members who are just getting started with a live event, what kinds of analytics should they really be focused on?
That rebuffer ratio, I know it sounds like a broken record, but that rebuffer ratio is key.
Okay.
If you can get it to less than 1%, which that was our goal for the NFL, you're going to have a compelling, consistent, smooth experience.
So Justin touched on the last question that I was going to ask, which has to do with adaptive bit rate. And I'll open this up to any of you on the panel. Is there a benefit to measuring how long or what bit rates most of your customers reside at in terms of both the initial and kind of the average across the board? And is there an actionable item in that says during the middle of a live event, you could actually drop some of those bit rates and modify the manifest?
Yeah, I'll actually, I'm going to take that, I'm going to step back a job to when I was at Viacom overseeing live operations. And we actually hit a point where we were over our CDN commit. And it was, I think it was the Xbox One launch. And it was like 300,000 PCV, and using the tools that we had, which was Conviva, we were able to see actually what portion of our audience was on our basically top bit rates. And we were actually able to say, okay, you know what, this is interesting. Very few people are on our top bit rate, but if we drop that, we'll fall back below what our cap is. Okay. And so I think having that data in real time is actionable.
And did you take action on that?
And so we did. We removed it from the manifest, got under our cap. Akamai was our one CDN for that. They were very happy or upset, depending on which way you look at it.
Yeah, if it's the revenue guys at the end.
We just want the customer to be happy. Just for the record.
But then from a kind of after perspective, if you're able to see what your usage is across your bit rates, you can actually make intelligent decisions around what your encoding stack should be. You may find that you have certain bit rates that nobody's even hitting as they switch through, or they only have 1 or 2% of your playing time. And is it really worth even producing those then?
Okay, good. Anybody else?
I would kind of piggyback on what Dylan just said. For the NFL stream, our focus, we had a lot of bandwidth secured, but we also had measures in. Our engineering team built a video policy server that would allow us to lower the bit rate of 6.7 megs, which was our high bit rate, if we needed to. Fortunately, we didn't have to touch that. We don't like to fix it if it's not broken, so we were fortunate with that. But yeah, if you need to be able to at least reduce your highest bit rate, I don't know about going in and tinkering with the sub bit rates below that, but if you're running up against your bandwidth cap, you've got to be able to way to mitigate that risk.
Sure, definitely. All right, before we go to audience questions, I'm going to flip over to the slide that you had, Chris. Let's see if I can find.
Yeah, I thought this one was going to be at the beginning.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay though.
Well, you said it was the drop the mic one, so I figured that.
Fair enough. Yeah, so I thought this was going to be at the beginning, but so if you haven't seen our press release, we delivered 33.6 million streams, and there were 15.2 million unique users. 33% of those streams were delivered to international audiences, so that was a big win for us as well as the NFL. And we delivered streams to 185 countries.
Wow, very nice. All right, audience questions again. Just a second.
Shoot, Alex.
Didn't I ask him that just a minute ago?
Secret.
So peak concurrent viewers.
Maybe that'll come out later. I don't know, but right now we've been encouraged not to share that number.
Okay, interesting. Can you tell us the average length of time that somebody was watching the game?
I can tell you we delivered 460 million minutes of video.
Okay, so we can do some math and maybe come up
If you're
with
good
a
with
number.
math, you can get
You
close.
can get an average.
Yeah,
can get
of course you
close,
can get
yeah.
an average, right. That's not what we're asking for. We're asking for peak.
What's your biggest challenge with consuming so much QoS data?
Biggest challenge with consuming QoS data from what standpoint?
So the data that's coming in from all these different players, what's like the biggest challenge, especially when you have an audience like this? What's your biggest challenge as far as
So the challenge being that you have the big data problem where all these players are providing information in. Is the challenge to make it actionable? Is the challenge to actually assess it in real time or to deal with it later?
I would say it's probably all of the above. Fortunately, we're a big data company, and all that data is aggregated. And we conduct postmortems after big events like the NFL, and our video stakeholders look at each piece of that data and then make future decisions based on what we learned after every event.
Anybody else want to comment to that? All right. Other audience questions?
This is a question more about what your experience is with people who do measure and how they set themselves up. So what's from a best practice perspective, if you're someone who's making a live stream and you want to take advantage of this data, what have you seen as a best practice in terms of setting yourself up for that? Like people, where they are, how they do that.
So are you asking, looking at historical data and then making a decision for future events, or are you asking about during the event itself? Okay.
So when you ask about people and where they are, I assume you're talking about regionally, your audience regionally.
The people who are actually taking the data in, the argument, how are they set up?
Well, I mean, it's a platform-based solution, so we'll partner with people like Conviva. We've got our own internal analytics tools that we use, that we capture that data. I'm not sure I'm answering your question very well, but
Operational question in terms of how you deal with that when it's actually happening. So the people that you have, again, are they centralized in one particular spot for the duration of the live stream?
So I think during today's keynote, one of the things that was interesting to me, I'm not going to.
the war room.
Yeah, well, so the executive decision center or the war room, but then also the control room and also the production studio and also the fantasy overlay. You had a number, and I would assume it wasn't mentioned, but there's some sort of squawk box between those to have conversation.
Yeah, we use Google Hangouts for discussions and conference bridges, but I mean that was a multi-region task, like to execute the NFL. We had CBS in London, fibering it back to the U.S., and then we were acquiring. We did the signal acquisition, encoding, and distribution all from our Dallas, Texas facility. We had a war room, executive war room in Sunnyvale. That's where corporate headquarters are. We had a studio. We had our studio in Sunnyvale also producing the fantasy version. of the game. So it was all over the globe basically.
And then I would assume the Network Operations Center also had, you had multiple places besides just Dallas and Sunnyvale and London.
Yes, there was knock room. There was knock operations in Sunnyvale as well as Dallas.
Okay, and I think this goes to Dylan's point where you provide different information to everybody, but at some point in an executive decision center or war room, all that stuff has to be available to be able to make those decisions in close to real time.
Yeah, a lot of the real-time decisions were made in Dallas, and then we communicated at Sunnyvale, and so everybody was on board before you made a change.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I mean, when you're managing live events and there's so many different parties involved, within your own company, your own team, across the different vendors, and really calling out the responsibilities and expectations are key when you run these type of live events and defining the operations.
Yeah, I didn't even mention that we had a separate service engineering team that was on the phone with all of our CDN providers throughout the entire event. So it was a big collaboration.
So I've got a totally geek process question. Is the single point of failure the executive decision center? In other words, if the connection to there went down, is the rest of the team able to operate and make autonomous decisions?
So the good news on this one is
It didn't happen, I know.
Yeah, it didn't.
Right.
It didn't happen, but like everybody that I work with in Dallas, we've been at Yahoo at least 10 plus years.
Okay.
And we just communicate to Sunnyvale and as a good partner. And if we had gone completely silent with them, we could make all decisions from Dallas based on our video policy API that our engineering team built.
Dylan, you're smiling. You have something to comment to that?
No, just it's bringing me back to my days on that side.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because there's always some failure point that you have to look for. All right. Other questions?
What were the player and video playback protocol formats used? Were all limited to HTML5-based technology, or other plugins also used?
So our player is built on Flash and JavaScript, with the exception of Safari. That was an HTML5 player, and on the live video side, actually on the VOD side as well. Yahoo is an HLS only shop right now.
Okay. Any more questions?
This may be a stupid question, but do you get the same level of measurement for ads as you do for the rest of the real stream as such?
Ads is somewhat outside the scope of my expertise, but I've got some Yahoo peers in here that can probably answer that better than I after the show.
And if I remember correctly from the keynote this morning, the ads were inserted before it came to you, so it wasn't dynamic ad insertion.
Right. Most of the time on our live events, the NFL was unique. Our live events, we have pre-rolls that run.
Right.
We've experimented with Scuddy markers.
Scuddies, right.
Yep. That's coming.
Okay.
We decided, not to pursue that for this particular game.
If you do mid-rolls now and don't have Scuddy markers, is it somebody just manually marking in to do an ad?
We don't have that. That solution really doesn't exist for us right now, and we don't want a manual solution.
All right. Well,
nobody
does.
Nobody does.
If
right?
they've tried it once, they don't.
Yeah,
go
we
back.
want to automate that. I've done that a long time ago, and it was with interns, and it was horrific.
Right in the middle of the major play. Here's a commercial. All right. Probably time for one more question. All right, so I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for being on the panel today. And